The funeral flowers had only just begun to fade when the calls started. I was in my kitchen on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after we buried Helen, watching the steam curl from a coffee mug I hadn't touched. It was dark green, chipped at the handle, a Father's Day gift from my granddaughter Emily. Now, it felt heavy, foreign, like it belonged to a man I no longer was. Everything felt foreign. The house, my reflection, and even my own voice when I answered the phone. "Dad, we need to talk about the house." Mark's voice was sharp with an impatience I'd known since he was a teenager. Only now, at 38, he wasn't asking. He was telling N. "Good morning to you too, Mark," I said, my voice flat. "Don't start with me," he sighed. "Laura and I have been talking. This place is too big for you alone. The taxes, the upkeep, it's not realistic. We've already found a buyer. N, we've already found a buyer." The words, so casual, so final, hung in the air. "There is no mortgage," I said. "Helen and I had paid it off 6 years ago, a secret we kept for our own quiet peace." They assumed we struggled, and I let them. Next short, dismissive laugh came through the phone. "Dad, please. Mom's pension barely covered her medications. We all know you're under strain." I looked out the window at the garden Helen and I had tended for 25 years. The rosemary, the lemon tree, every plant was a monument to what I had lost. "You're worried about me?" I asked. "I'm worried about what's practical," he replied, each word clipped. "We could put the money from the sale to good use. Emily's tuition." I stopped listening. I could already see the spreadsheet in his mind, with columns labeled "Dad's house sale, proceeds, split." I had taught him numbers when he was a boy. Now he was calculating me and Mark. I said, my tone even, "You've been planning this for a while." "That's called being responsible," he countered. "We can't just sit around until something happens to you. Until something happens to you." "I'll think about it," I said, and ended the call before he could sell me my own life in bullet points. The house was quiet again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the stillness of mourning. It was the pause between one blow and the next. The phone rang again. This time, it was my daughter, Laura in Dad. She began, her voice pitched a little too high, the way it got when she was trying to make bad news sound like a gift. "Mark and I are on the same page. We think it's for the best. You could move in with us. We've got the finished basement. We could add a kitchenette. And the money?" I asked. "Well," she hesitated. "After we cover the contractor, you could set some aside. Help with Emily's tuition. It's all family, Dad." A win-win. I could hear the rehearsed cadence, the ending they had already agreed upon. "Laura," I said, "when was the last time you called me to talk about something other than money?" NNFOR a long time. I just stood in the hallway, the light catching the dust on the table. Helen's reading glasses were still there, folded neatly on a paperback she would never finish. Touching them felt like a step I wasn't ready to take. My feet carried me, without thinking, to her study. The room smelled of lemon oil and the faint trace of her perfume. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it. I sat in her chair, the leather worn smooth where her elbows had rested, and for the first time in 2 weeks, my shoulders eased. There was a bottom drawer that always stuck. I pulled it open. Inside, beneath old tax returns and appliance manuals, my fingers found the edge of a pale blue folder. A yellow sticky note was attached to the front, with Helen's handwriting in tidy block letters, .nnif. "You're reading this. You need to know what's inside." N and I sat there, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than loss. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was direction. I hesitated, my fingers tracing the edge of the pale blue folder. Outside, a breeze moved through the lemon tree, scattering sunlight across the desk. When I finally opened it, the first thing I saw was a sheaf of financial statements. They were from bank accounts I didn't recognize. Not our joint accounts, but individual ones, all in Helen's name. One was from a small credit union, in another county. Another was from an online bank I had never heard her mention. The sums weren't astronomical, but they were significant. It was clear Helen had been quietly moving money for years. But why? Under the statements were property documents. My breath caught. It was a deed for a small villa in Portugal, purchased 10 years ago. The owner's name, Helen Margaret Hale. My name was nowhere on it. I flipped to the next page. A letter from a law firm in Lisbon confirmed the property's current value. Helen had declined their offer to manage it as a rental. In her neat handwriting at the bottom of the page, she had written, "Not yet. Keep private, NNTHE." Word private sat there like a pebble in my shoe. There were more documents, life insurance policies I'd never signed. I expected to see Mark and Laura as the beneficiaries. But one caught my eye. A newer policy, much smaller, with only one name listed. Emily. No mention of her parents. Nanai leaned back in Helen's chair. The lemon-scented polish in the wood seemed stronger now. Helen had always been deliberate. This wasn't an oversight. It was a plan, and I picked up a smaller envelope tucked in the back of the folder. Inside was a letter, dated 2 years ago, in Helen's looping cursive. "And Richard," it began, "if you have found this, then I am gone. And if I am right, the calls have already started. They will circle you, my love. Not because they need you, but because they want what we've built." I've watched it for years. Small comments, questions about money, the way they count what isn't theirs yet. You've always given them the benefit of the doubt. I stopped doing that long ago. NNTHE house is yours. It stays yours. I paid it off so you would never have to answer to them. But I also knew they would try to make you believe you couldn't manage alone. That is why there is this. A second plan, NNTHE Villa in Portugal, is for you. You'll find instructions in the back. Follow them if you need to disappear for a while. Sometimes, the only way to win is not to play their game. NNHER voice was in my head as I read, calm, even, not angry, but certain. In the back pocket of the folder was a typed page. Contacts for the Lisbon law firm, a local caretaker named Anna, and a key taped to the paper. Next to the key, a final note in Helen's hand. "Trust Anna. She owes me her life." Long story. I let the paper fall to the desk. My pulse was steady, but my mind was racing. For the rest of the afternoon, I moved through the house, like a man walking in 2 timelines at once. Every object, a photo of Mark, a vase from Laura, now felt like evidence in a case I hadn't known I was building. That evening, Mark called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Laura texted an hour later. "We'll come by Saturday. We'll bring Emily." The phrasing wasn't lost on me. Bring Emily. A shield. A tool. A way to manage me. Near midnight, I locked the study door for the first time in years. The blue folder went into the bottom drawer of my desk, not Helen's. The key to the villa went into the small safe behind the bookcase, the one no one else knew existed. I stood there, hand resting on the shelf, listening to the quiet house. And somewhere in the darkness, I could almost hear Helen's voice. "You don't have to fight the way they expect." The next morning, I woke before dawn. I made coffee, drank it this time, and sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper. I wrote 2 columns, what they know and what they don't. The first list was short. The second was longer than I expected. When the sun finally broke over the garden, I looked at the lemon tree and thought about Portugal, about Anna, whoever she was, about disappearing, not out of fear, but on my terms. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I felt something sharp under the grief, not anger exactly, but resolve. They thought I was an old man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to be pushed. They had no idea I had already built a bridge. And Saturday came with a pale, reluctant winter sun. At 9:17 a.m., I heard the familiar impatience of tires on gravel. Mark's black SUV, polished to a blade. Laura in the passenger seat, phone already in hand. Emily in the back, forehead pressed to the glass. I opened the door before they could knock. "Hi, Grandpa," Emily said, wrapping her arms around my waist. Her hair smelled faintly of the strawberry shampoo Helen used to buy for her. I held her a moment longer than I needed to. Mark and Laura followed, bringing the scent of expensive perfume and cold air with them. "We found a buyer," Mark began, dispensing with pleasantries. "Solid offer. It's a chance for you to downsize, not worry about taxes." "I told you," I said, stirring my tea slowly, letting the spoon ring against the ceramic. "There's no mortgage. Taxes are manageable. It's about practicality, Dad," Laura said, leaning forward. "You don't need all this space. You're alone here." "Practicality for me or for you?" I asked. Mark's jaw tightened. "It's just, we have plans. The offer would let you move somewhere comfortable, and it would free up." He stopped himself, but I knew the words. Free up the capital. Man, what if I'm comfortable here? I asked. "That's not sustainable." He snapped. "Here's the thing," I said, leaning back. "Helen wanted me here. She made sure I could stay." "She paid off the house years ago," Laura blinked. "Paid it off?" "6 years ago," I confirmed, quietly, because she didn't want it debated. It was a small drop of truth, just enough to shift the ground under them without revealing how deep the foundation really went. They stayed for another half hour, trying to steer the conversation back to logistics, but I let their words drift past me. When they finally stood to leave, Mark said, "Just think about it, Dad. The buyer won't wait forever." After they left, I stood in the doorway, feeling the cold air on my face. In Helen's study, I opened the blue folder and looked at the photograph of her and Emily. Teach her how to keep what matters. I realized then, the real battle wasn't about the house. It was about teaching the next generation not to let go of what's worth holding. And the first lesson would be subtle. I picked up the phone and dialed the Lisbon number, and when the line clicked, a woman's voice answered. "Anna speaking." "Anna," I said, my voice steady. "Helen Hale was my wife. She told me to call you when the time came." There was a pause, then a warm, accented voice. "Then, Mr. Hale, I think we should meet. And soon." I hung up, the echo of her voice still in my ear. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground shift. Not under me, but for them. They thought they were setting the terms. The board had just been reset. Anna's voice lingered in my ear long after we hung up, like the warmth that remains in a room after someone kind has left. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the rosemary shiver in a breeze I couldn't feel. Revenge is not an explosion, I realized. It's a thermostat. You bring the temperature where you need it, and you let everyone else mistake comfort for control. NNMY first call after Anna was not to my children. It was to Peter Alvarez, my lawyer, a man unfussy, precise, and allergic to drama. "In Richard," he said when his assistant passed me through. "I'm sorry about Helen. Come in this afternoon. Bring whatever she left you." I could hear the soft click of him opening his calendar, a sound that made me feel steadier than coffee. I gathered the blue folder and, for the first time since the funeral, put on a collared shirt. Grief makes sweatpants feel like armor, but today I wanted to look like a man who still signs his name with a straight line. NNWE sat at a conference table the color of old tobacco. I placed the folder between us, opened to the deed to the house, recorded 6 years ago, my name alone on it. "Helen insisted," I said, and felt my throat tighten. NNHE nodded, businesslike, his reading glasses low on his nose. "She did this right," he said softly, tapping the margin. "Quit claim to your sole ownership. If anyone's promising a sale without your signature, they're selling air." He kept going, his voice a calm recitation of facts that felt like a shield. "We amended the trust 3 years back. She removed the children as presumptive beneficiaries to the real property. They inherit from your estate if, and only if, you say so. The only non-probate transfer she left outside your discretion is a small life insurance policy for Emily." He glanced up. That one was important to her. I know, I said. It hurt less than I expected to say it out loud. Has either child attempted to act on your behalf? He asked, his question a precise surgical instrument. Mark found a buyer, I said, my voice as dry as a ledger. Came to my door with a letter of intent. Peter's mouth made a shape that wasn't a smile. Good. Then let me be clear. He slid 2 papers across the table. One was a cease and desist letter for the realtor. The other was a notice of non-representation. It says plainly, Peter explained, that you have not authorized any person to act on your behalf, and any claim to the contrary is fraudulent. I'll file copies with the county recorder and send them certified mail so nobody can pretend they missed it. And I appreciate it, I said. And now, he said, gesturing to the folder. What else is in there? Portugal, I said. He lifted a brow, not with mockery, but with the interest of a chess player when a pawn becomes a queen. I gave him the summary, the villa, the title in Helen's name, the instructions to trust Anna. Your wife was a very smart woman. He said, we'll contact the Lisbon firm on your behalf, he continued, already in motion. Establish your standing, confirm title. Do you want this property to remain discreet? Yes, I said. For now. Then we set up a holding structure, he said, warming into the work. A revocable trust with a name that doesn't ring bells. You want distance? We can create distance. I liked the way he said we. Some words are ropes thrown across water. When we finished signing the letters, his assistant came in with envelopes already addressed. Watching those white rectangles slide across the table felt better than any speech I could have made to my son. The world loves paper. Paper loves procedure. When you can't make people decent, you can make them careful. Back at home, I put the carbon copies in the bottom drawer of my desk, not Helen's. The distinction mattered. Her folder was how we got here. My drawer was what we did with it. 9:00 afternoon brought a voicemail from Mark. Dad, call me back. Don't do anything rash. We're trying to make this easy. The word easy again, as if comfort were a leash. I let it sit unheard. A text from Laura followed. Dinner Tuesday? We can bring takeout. I typed, sounds good, and didn't send it. Then I typed it again and did. You don't win by being predictable. You win by controlling the clock. And drove to the post office and rented a P.O. box. Medium, I told the clerk. And an extra key. There's preparation that looks like paranoia, and preparation that looks like a plan. The key sat warm in my pocket as I walked out. A small click that translated in my head as options. On the way home, I stopped by the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I stood before Helen's name on the stone, the wind moving through the field of veterans, flags like a low applause for people who showed up. When I did speak, it wasn't eloquent. They think I'm soft, I said. They think grief makes me malleable. The air didn't answer, but the ground felt steady, and that was enough. You did most of the hard part, I added, softer now. Now I'll do the rest. On Monday morning, the certified mail receipts started hitting my tracking app, a domino line of green check marks that felt like poetry. 2 hours later, a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Mr. Hale, this is Greg from Hawthorne Realty. There seems to be some confusion. Your son indicated. I stopped the playback. He'd already said the only part that mattered. I returned the call after lunch, put him on speaker, and set my phone to record, because one day you always wish you had. And Mr. Hawthorne, I said, there is no confusion. I own my home. Any further contact must be in writing to my attorney. Do not come to my door again. Do not speak with my children about my property. Of course, he tried to sound conciliatory. We only want what's best for your client, I said. Good day. Anna and I spoke that afternoon. Her English had a music to it, and when she laughed, her voice did a small skip on the second syllable. You're Helen, she said. She saved me once. And I didn't ask how. Not yet. The people who deserve your trust tell you when the timing is right. The house is ready, she added, and I pictured white walls and blue shutters, even though I had not yet seen them. You come. I will place fresh linens, lemons in a bowl. You will sleep. Sleep felt like a luxury I had been stealing in small coins. Soon, I said. I need a week. I will wait, she said. Portugal waits well. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and bought a ticket to Faro, one way, fully refundable, purchased with the credit card Helen had labeled in our budget as travel, if we dare. I used the P.O. box for the billing address and printed nothing. I wasn't hiding. I was simply refusing to be found by people who hadn't asked permission to look. I walked the house that evening with a notebook, not to inventory, but to listen. The framed photo of Mark at 12 in his mismatched Little League uniform speaks to the boy who loved the game more than winning. Laura's college ceramics speak to a talent she abandoned when she decided praise was more valuable than clay. Emily's crayon drawing of the garden speaks to a part of the future I am willing to invest in. I put sticky notes on boxes in the hall closet. Mark, personal return. Laura, piano books return. The word return calmed me. When someone decides you are a resource, the most effective response is to give them back the parts of themselves they left in your care. And Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, the realtor again, this time with a second man, older, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I opened the door only as wide as the chain allowed. And certified letters, I said, mean we don't need to do this dance. And older man raised his hands. I'm your son's attorney. He asked me to check on you. Check on me, I repeated. I didn't unlatch the chain. You received my counsel's notice. NNTHE realtor spoke then, attempting to be genial. We thought perhaps you hadn't seen, and I see fine, I said. You may leave a card. They did, and I let the cards sit on the console table like two moths, harmless unless you forget they eat through fabric when you're not watching. At noon, Mark called. I answered this time. It felt like a day for letting things reveal themselves. And Dad, what are you doing? No hello. Greg says you threatened legal action. And acromised it, I said. Different verb. And occurred. You're being ridiculous, he snapped. This buyer is real. This is a good number. We're trying to... Who is we? I asked quietly. NNHE inhaled sharply. Laura and I. Our families. You know what I mean. I do, I said, and that's the problem. There was a silence that told me he was calculating the cost of his next sentence. If you insist on making this difficult, he said finally, we'll have to look at other options. Conservatorships are a thing for a reason. NNTHE words slid into the line like a piece of glass in soup. I didn't let it cut me. That is a serious claim, I said, my voice still even. Are you accusing me of incapacity? I'm saying, he said, softer now, trying a different tactic, that we can't sit around and wait for you to start making mistakes. I just made one, I said. I picked up this call. I paused, because I was not interested in being clever so much as being clear. Any further threats will be forwarded to my attorney. We will meet on Thursday, at my house, at 2 o'clock. Bring your counsel, I'll have mine. We will talk like adults, or not at all. NNHE sputtered, then said yes, because bullies prefer a schedule if it offers them a chance to wear ties. When I hung up, I walked to the study and opened the bottom drawer. I took out the small envelope I hadn't touched yet. On the front, Helen had written, Independence. Inside was a bank card and a typed slip with a pin. A note in her hand underneath. You hate allowances. Consider this a dare, not a gift. Use it to build a life, not to buy time. The audacity of her faith made my eyes ache. I set the card on the desk where the light could catch it and remind me I had a spine. NNTHAT evening. I changed the deadbolt on the front door, not because I was afraid, but because I liked the feeling of a key in a lock that answers only to me. That evening, I changed the deadbolt on the front door, not because I was afraid, but because I liked the feeling of a key in a lock that answers only to me. I oiled the hinges, tightened the screws in the banister on the back staircase, and replaced the batteries in the smoke detectors, work that seems small until one night it isn't. When the house sighed into the quiet that follows honest labor, I poured a finger of the scotch I had been saving for a celebration I hadn't defined yet, and sat at the kitchen table with nothing in front of me. The absence of paper felt like a decision. Not sleep came clean for the first time in weeks. I woke just before 6 to a text from a Lisbon number. Senor Haley, we have prepared documents to establish you as the sole heir of the property. Please confirm when you are ready to receive the courier. It was signed with a name I didn't recognize from the letterhead. Paper moving through the world on my behalf while I slept. There are worse lullabies. Nye took a walk around the block. No coat, just my breath like mist in the cold air. An older neighbor, Joyce, waved from her porch and asked after me in a way that did not require an answer. When I reached my front steps again, a small cardboard package sat against the door. No return address, just my name in Mark's quick, impatient handwriting. Inside was a glossy brochure from a condo development. Smiling, gray-haired people near a pool, a list of amenities in bullet points, a note on top. Thought you'd like to look. Love, M. I smiled in a way that did not show teeth and set the brochure under the scotch bottle to level a wobble. Useful, after all. And Thursday arrived with a sky the color of wet stone. Peter, my lawyer, came 5 minutes early. We sat at the same kitchen table, where my children had told me my life no longer fit them. He placed a yellow legal pad on the wood in front of him and wrote the date at the top. When Mark arrived with a man he introduced as our attorney, Jeff, Laura followed a step behind, her eyes bright and tired. Emily was not with them. I felt her absence like a light you didn't know you were using until it was gone. We're here in good faith, Jeff began, to discuss a path forward that honors everyone's interests. Peter slid the cease and desist letter across the table. My client's interests are honored when his ownership is respected, he said. This letter restates what you already know. He has not listed his home for sale. Any further effort to do so will constitute tortious interference, and you will be named. Not on Mark's jaw worked. Dad, Laura tried. We're just trying to think long-term. Me too, I said. I started thinking long-term before you learned to drive. Mark couldn't stop himself anymore. Look, you keep the house if that's what you want, but you can't expect us to carry the rest of it. Carry what? I asked gently. What are you carrying? He looked surprised at his own words. The burden, he said, the word smaller now. The burden of my life? I asked, still gentle. The burden of my bills, which you don't pay. Or the burden of not getting what you had already counted as yours. He looked at his lawyer as if the law might save him from language. It could not. Peter spoke into the quiet. There is also the matter of the threats of conservatorship. Those statements were recorded. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. We would never, she began, then stopped, hearing herself. I'm tired of this, Mark said, his eyes hot. You're tired, I said, nodding. I understand. Being told no is exhausting when you've rehearsed yes. We let the quiet sit at the table for a minute. Then I pushed a sheet of paper across to them. It was not what they expected. A simple list, written in my neat block letters. Here is what I am doing, on my timeline. It had 3 items. 1. I am not selling my home. NNTWO. If I choose to relocate at any point, I will tell you after the decision is made. 3. I will continue to support Emily directly at my discretion. Any attempt to mediate that support through intermediaries Ends all support. Laura's eyes glistened. It surprised me. It shouldn't have. That behind all the calculation, there was still a person who could be reached by consequence. "Dad," she whispered. "Please, I am not the enemy," I said, and felt the truth of it down to my feet. "But I am not a resource to be managed." Peter collected his pad. Jeff, their lawyer, murmured something about needing time to digest. Mark stood without looking at me and moved toward the door like the house itself had offended him. Laura lingered at the threshold. "Do you have to be so cold?" she asked. "I don't," I said. "I choose to be clear. They were gone for 3 minutes when my phone buzzed." A Portuguese number. I stepped into the study and closed the door before I answered. "Senor Hale," the voice said, friendly and precise. "We have couriered the documents to your postbox. They include confirmation of your status. We also included the information your wife asked us to give you, only when you were ready." She was very careful. "Thank you," I said, and my voice sounded like a man who knew what he would do next. It felt strange and good in my mouth. When I hung up, I stood there with my hand on the back of Helen's chair. My thumb rubbed the place where the leather had worn smooth from years of her leaning in. Paper could not bring her back. Paper could not teach my children what she had tried to teach them before they decided that wanting was the same as deserving. But paper, when thick enough and stamped by the right offices, could hold a boundary, while the rest of me did the quieter work of living. On my way to the P.O. box, I passed the condo development from the brochure. The sign out front promised, "Maintenance-free living." I laughed. There is no such thing. Either you do the work yourself, or someone does it to you. I prefer the kind of work that leaves scuffs on my knuckles and my name on the deed. The post office smelled like cut paper and patience. My key turned smoothly. Inside my box, a yellow slip waited. "See clerk for package." The woman with the kind eyes handed me a flat, heavy envelope. Back in my truck, I slid it open. Stamps from Lisbon winked up at me. I lifted the first document, a confirmation in black ink that a small house with white walls and blue shutters across the Atlantic was, in the eyes of 2 governments, mine to decide upon. Underneath was the letter for Anna, and at the bottom, a note in Helen's hand, a copy of a copy, still sure despite the generations of paper between us. If you're holding this, you are not lost. You are choosing. Anna and I put the envelope on the passenger seat, where she used to ride, and drove home slower than usual, as if speed might shake something loose I wanted to keep. In the driveway, I killed the engine and sat for a moment. The house looked back at me, old, honest, a place that asked for work and paid in dignity. I thought about Portugal, about lemons in a bowl, about a terrace where the wind carried the sea. I thought about Emily's drawing and Mark's jaw and Laura's eyes. Then, because a plan is only as good as the step you take next, I picked up my phone and opened a new message to Anna. "Arriving soon. Please prepare the house as you would for Helen." I hit send. A second later, her reply, "As you wish, senor. I will set out fresh linens and cut lemons. We will wait for you. Some victories are loud. Mine would not be. Mine would sound like paper sliding into files, like keys turning in locks, like footsteps on flagstone at dawn. Mine would look like a man in a good shirt standing on his porch, with a package under his arm, and no intention of asking permission to live his own life." The Lisbon envelope stayed on Helen's desk overnight, a quiet lighthouse of paper. I didn't open it again. Knowing it existed was enough. It changed the way the house sounded when I moved through it. Floorboards that had creaked like complaints now felt like conversations. A strange thing happens when you stop waiting to be told who you are. The objects that have always been with you finally answer back. Morning brought a sky the color of dishwater. I stood at the sink, drinking coffee, and looked at the lemon tree. It seemed less like an accusation now, and more like a task. Helen used to say, "A life is built from the tasks you stop resenting."
I made a new list on the legal pad that still smelled faintly of her hand cream. 3 columns this time. What goes, what stays, what travels. What goes ended up looking like a family portrait drawn by a court reporter. Shoes from a decade when Mark thought Italian leather could do what consistency couldn't. The butcher-block knife set Laura borrowed for a Thanksgiving and never returned. Boxes of trophies, the small currencies of childhood we hang on to, because the adult currencies are less certain. What stays was blessedly short. The table where our children's heights were ticked into the wood. The books with Helen's margin notes like small trails through a forest. The piano she never learned to play but loved to polish. What travels was the least complicated list of all. The Lisbon envelope, 1 suitcase, my passport, and her photograph from the beach, the year we let ourselves be young for more than a weekend. I called the moving company at 9:02 a.m. A man named Rodriguez answered, his voice possessing the patient sturdiness of someone who had lifted other people's lives into trucks for a living. We spoke in specifics. 2 deliveries, 2 addresses, 1 truck. "Is this an estate clearance?" he asked. "No," I told him honestly. "It's a correction." He laughed once, softly, as if he understood more than I'd said. The rest of the day I spent touching what would go and what would stay. In the hallway closet, I found the box with Emily's Christmas ornaments, the glitter-crusted cardboard stars she insisted we keep. Those didn't go into any shipment. Those went on the what travels list, because there are some things you don't surrender to a lesson. The house changed as the boxes filled. There was a mercy in choosing what is yours to carry and what is your job to set down.
The day the moving truck was scheduled to arrive, I woke at 4:52 a.m. The house was dark and certain around me. I made coffee, showered, and put on a clean shirt. I wrote 2 notes, one for Mark, one for Laura, and sealed them without rereading. They said the same thing in different words. I'm returning what belongs to you. I'm keeping what belongs to me. The difference is not up for debate. I didn't sign them with love. Names can be demands. Today, I preferred statements. At 6:57, the truck turned onto my street. Rodriguez hopped out at exactly 7 o'clock. "Mr. Hale," he said, and shook my hand with a grip that suggested he appreciated the difference between a job and a favor. "You have the addresses?" I asked, and NHE patted his chest pocket. "And the instructions. Deliver to the door. Ask for a signature. If they won't sign, take a picture. Send time-stamped." They worked efficiently, moving boxes out of rooms that had waited too long to be honest about what they were. The piano bench with Laura's name scrolled on the bottom. Mark's leather jacket from 1999. The trophies. The shoebox of clay that was more newspaper than art. I stood where I could see everything without appearing to see everything. A skill fathers learn when they're tired of being told their eyes are controlling. And at 7:39, they pulled away. I poured a second coffee and let the kitchen absorb the new shape of the day. The house didn't feel smaller. It felt truer. I put the notes to Mark and Laura into separate envelopes. I tucked Laura's into the top box labeled Piano Books, so she'd see it before she saw the title of the song she never learned to finish. I tucked Mark's into the jacket collar, because finding a letter in a place you put your mouth makes it harder to lie to yourself about what you just read. And at 8:12, my phone buzzed. A photo from Rodriguez. Mark's porch. The stack of boxes on the mat. The note in my handwriting, visible. 4 minutes later, another photo. Laura's stoop, the piano bench with the box on top. The caption was a single check mark, and an eye set the phone face down. This is what it looks like when you give people exactly what they asked for, and they discover that wanting is not the same as deserving. At 8:33 a.m., the doorbell rang. I knew the weight of the knock before I looked through the peephole. Mark's knuckles make a sound like someone testing a wall for its weaknesses. I left the chain on, opened the door the width of a father's patience, and met the eyes I had watched blink open the day he was born. "What is this?" he demanded, holding up his phone with the picture of the boxes on his porch, as if it were a verdict. "That," I said, "is your life being returned to you." NHE barked a laugh. "So you think you're clever?" "Not particularly," I said, "but I'm awake." He put his hand on the door, as if pressure could change its hinges. "Open this," he said. "And I did," I replied, and didn't. "You had your childhood things delivered to my house. You think this is, what? Petty?" "I think it's accurate," I said. "Things that belong to you should be at your house." He cursed softly, the way men do when they're not ready to be the man they think they are. He pushed a folded paper through the gap, the letter of intent, now looking tired and creased. "This is a good offer. You're being stubborn just to prove a point. There are points worth proving," I said. "No." "What? That you can't be told what's best for you? Congratulations." Message received. His mouth made a line I recognized from every game he lost when he was 7. "Do you realize how selfish this is?" "And selfish?" I repeated, not because I needed clarity, but because sometimes the echo of a word shames it into being honest. "We're trying to help you," he said, his volume rising. "The last tool of a man who has run out of others. Laura and I had a buyer lined up before I finished my coffee." "Yes," I said. I noticed. NNHE took a breath that tried to be a reset. "Where are you going?" "Inside," I said. "You can call me at 2 o'clock. I will be available until 3. I closed the door in a way that didn't slam. The chain fell back against the jamb with a small sound that felt like a punctuation mark. Laura left. The house exhaled. I collected the cups, washed them slowly, and put them back on the shelf in their spots, the same spots Helen had chosen. The small obedience of returning things to where they belong felt like a prayer I believed in. At noon, a new voicemail from the realtor, an apology shaped like a threat. "We didn't mean to cause stress, Mr. Hale, but if you reconsider this market," I deleted it. Peter texted, "All notices delivered. No further contact except written. Good work today." And I put the phone face down, not to avoid the world, but to give this house the courtesy of my undivided presence. I walked the rooms once more, then sat in Helen's study. I wrote one more line at the bottom of my legal pad. 4. Choose when to leave. Leave like a gentleman. It would not be an exit under the cover of shame. It would be a departure at the hour of my choosing, announced with the dignity of a man who had built a life in full and was not finally asking permission to keep it. And late that afternoon, I called Anna. "Senor," she answered on the second ring. "Soon," I said. "Anne." "I will open the windows," she replied, as if that were the most important job in the world. Maybe it was Anne, fresh linens, I said, because saying the words made the picture in my head turn from watercolor to oil. "Anne and lemons," she said. "Always lemons, always," I echoed. Twilight pressed its forehead to the windows. I made a small dinner for one, and ate it slowly, not because the food deserved it, but because my life did. Before bed, I wrote 2 emails. One to Peter, confirming I'd be unreachable for a few days. The second to Joyce next door, asking if she'd collect the mail and water the basil. I set aside the spare keys. Practicality is the bow you tie on clarity. In the dark, I lay awake long enough to hear the house settle. I thought about Emily's breath catching through the speaker. I thought about Laura asking, "What do you want me to learn?" I thought about Mark's jaw and how a man can wear it like armor and still be pierced by a single quiet sentence. When sleep finally came, it wasn't a bargain. It was a right. Morning would bring a ticket, a bag, a door closed behind me that wasn't about leaving so much as it was about arriving. Airports are designed to make you feel interchangeable. 1,000 moving parts all humming to the same hour, and you are just another carry-on with shoes in a bin. I stood in the line at customs in Faro, a line of people practicing patience in different languages. When it was my turn, the officer, a young man with an old face, stamped my passport and said, "Benvindo." It is a quiet sort of welcome when the stamp hits paper. proof that you've crossed something invisible and been allowed. Outside the sliding doors, the Algarve air had the temperature of a good handshake. A woman stood a few yards away, holding a piece of paper with my name on it. She was compact, her hair tucked into a low knot. "Anna, Senor Hale," she said, and stepped forward. She hugged me, as if it were not rude to do so. Her shoulders smelled faintly of oranges and laundry. "Your Helen," she said when she let me go, "would be angry if I did not welcome you this way." NNWE drove without wasting sentences. The house was smaller than my American house, and bigger than the one I had tried to shrink. White walls, blue shutters that made the light honest, a red tile roof that had learned to hold its tongue in storms. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a place that had answered yes when asked to be a home. Anna took a key from her pocket and placed it in my hand. "This is yours," she said. "In law, and in what matters." Inside, the floor was cool under my shoes. A simple couch, a wooden table, and a small kitchen tiled in blues that repeated the sea's ideas. A bowl sat on the counter with lemons that knew what they were doing. Beyond the kitchen, a small terrace waited, the Mediterranean saying all the things it always says, even to people who don't listen. I stood there and let it be a language I hadn't studied but could still understand. Nana placed a hand flat on the table. "The law firm in Lisbon sent confirmation," she said. "It's in the drawer." Inside was a tidy Portuguese explanation that a house is a house, and a man is the man allowed to decide about it. And underneath, a single page that named Anna as caretaker, with Helen's handwriting in the corner. "Trust her." After she left, I placed my American phone in a drawer, not as punishment, but as a truce. I walked the rooms. The bedroom faced a small street where the wind had learned to behave itself. The bathroom had a window that let the sea announce the hour. When sleep came, it did what Anna promised. I woke to noon light and the sound of plates somewhere, not mine. I lay there and let the foreign familiarity of the ceiling teach me a new map. This is what it felt like. Not a victory. Not revenge. Just the quiet, steady work of a life choosing to continue.